I stepped back through the screen door with a grocery bag full of bratwurst and a six-pack. And there in the kitchen of the lake house I'd rented for our 40th anniversary, my wife had her arms around my brother-in-law and he had his mouth on her neck. The bag hit the floor. A jar of mustard rolled under the table. Neither of them turned around. They didn't hear it over the box fan in the window and the radio playing some old Eagle song. And for about the 3 seconds I just stood there in the doorway like a man who'd walked into the wrong house. Except it was my house for the week, my anniversary, my wife, and the man with his hand sliding down her back was married to her sister. I'd been gone 25 minutes. I drove into town for the bratwurst because Diane said the place down the road had the good kind, the ones from the German butcher. And I wanted the weekend to be perfect. 40 years. We'd planned this for months. Her sister and her sister's husband were supposed to drive up the next morning, but they'd come early, said they wanted to beat the holiday traffic on the highway. And I'd thought, isn't that nice? The 4 of us, a few days on the water. I backed out the door quiet as I could, stood on the gravel by my truck with my heart going like a jackhammer, and I made myself breathe. There's a thing that happens to a man when the floor drops out. Your body wants to do something, yell, swing, drive into the lake, and your head goes very cold and very clear at the same time. Mine went cold, because I knew Diane. 40 years I knew her. If I walked back in there shouting, she'd cry. She'd say it wasn't what it looked like. She'd say I was tired and confused. And her sister's husband, a man who'd spent his whole career as a wealth manager, talking people out of their own money with a smile. He'd put a hand on my shoulder and say, "Easy now, let's all sit down." They would turn it around on me by sundown. I'd seen Carl do it to other people. I'd watched him at Thanksgiving make my own brother apologize for a comment Carl himself had started. He was good. He was smooth. And right now he had a clear advantage, because the only thing I had was 25 minutes of certainty and a carton of eggs I'd need to clean up before anybody noticed. I sat in the cab of the truck and my phone buzzed. "My son? Hope you and Mom are living it up, old man. 40 years. Insane. Love you both. Scott." 39 years old, lived an hour outside Kansas City with his wife and the twins, called me every Sunday whether he had news or not. How in God's name was I supposed to tell that boy his mother was kissing his uncle in a rented kitchen? How'd you tell your kid that the woman who taught him to ride a bike, who drove 4 hours through a snowstorm when he had appendicitis at college, who he still called for recipes, that she'd been lying to all of us? I didn't text back right away. I couldn't get my thumbs to work right. When they did, I didn't write what I was thinking. I called him instead. "Hey, Dad, everything okay? You sound funny." "Scott." I had to clear my throat. "I need you to do something for me, and I need you to do something for me, and I need you not to ask why. Not yet." A pause. He's a careful kid. "Gets it from me, okay? Those little cameras you put up at your place. The ones you watch from your phone, the ones that go on the porch and over the garage. Do you have any extras?" "I got a couple in a drawer, yeah." "Why?" "I need you to drive up to the lake tonight. Bring them. Don't call your mother. Don't tell Megan where you're going. Make something up. And when you get close, you call me. Don't pull in the driveway." The line went quiet for a long time. I could hear him thinking. He's an electrician, my son, good with his hands and better with his head, and he was already running the math on what kind of trouble would make his father talk like this. "Dad," he said finally, and his voice had changed. "Is it Mom?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. "I'll be there in 4 hours," he said. I cleaned up the eggs and the mustard before I went back in. By then, my wife was alone at the counter, slicing tomatoes, humming along to the radio, and she turned around with the same smile she'd given me at the altar in 1985. "There you are. I thought you got lost. Did they have the good brats?" They did. My voice came out flat and I covered it with a cough. "Where's Carl?" "Out on the dock with a beer." She rolled her eyes, fond. "Your brother-in-law. Acts like he built the lake. Where's Nora?" "Oh," she texted. "They had traffic anyway. Can you believe it after all that? She'll be up in the morning." So her sister wasn't even here yet. Just the two of them, alone, all afternoon, while I drove to town for bratwurst. They hadn't beaten the traffic. They'd just made sure they had the house to themselves for an hour. "You all right?" Diane touched my arm. "You look pale." "Long drive into town," I said. "I'm gonna lie down for 20 minutes. In the bedroom, I texted my son, "When you get here, park down by the boat launch. Walk up, I'll meet you." Then I lay on top of the covers and stared at the ceiling fan and counted the slow turns and tried to figure out how a man gets to 63 years old and knows nothing about his own life. That evening, we sat out on the deck and watched the sun go down over the water. Carl told a story about a client who'd panicked during some market dip, and Carl had talked him off the ledge, made him a fortune, haha, and Diane laughed at it like it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. I'd heard her laugh that way at my jokes for 4 decades. I'd thought it belonged to me. I watched her hand brush his when she passed him the chip bowl. I watched him let his fingers stay a half second too long. Small things. Things I'd seen 100 times at family dinners and never once questioned, because why would I? You don't go through life suspecting your wife's sister's husband. You'd have to be a sick person to look for that. How long, I kept thinking. How long? At 9:40 my phone lit up. "Here, by the launch. I'm gonna take a walk before bed," I said, standing. "Stretch the legs. Don't fall in the lake in the dark," Diane said. And Carl laughed, and I walked down the gravel toward the water with my hands shaking in my pockets. My son was leaning against his truck, ball cap pulled low, and when he saw my face in the porch light, he came off that truck fast. "Dad," I told him, "all of it, the kitchen, the 25 minutes, the way they'd come up early to be alone." I watched my boy's face go from worry to disbelief to something I'd never seen on him before. A hard, still, grown man anger that scared me a little. "You're sure?" he said. "Dad, are you 100% sure? Because once son, I know what I saw." He let out a breath through his nose, reached into the truck and pulled out a shoebox. 2 cameras. They run off the Wi-Fi and the battery. No wires. Where do you want 'em? We worked in the dark and quiet. One went up on a shelf in the great room, tucked behind a row of paperback mysteries somebody'd left at the rental, angled down at the couch. The other we sat on top of the cabinet in the hall, where it could see the bedroom doors. Scott showed me how to pull up the feeds on my phone, how to flip between them, how it recorded automatically to the cloud. "I'm staying," he said. "You can't. They'll wonder why. I'll get a room at that motel by the highway. I'll tell your wife I had a job fall through up in Springfield and figured I'd swing by. She won't think twice." He gripped my shoulder, and his hand was as big as mine now, bigger maybe. "You're not doing this by yourself. I don't care what it is. I'm not letting you." That was the first time in 2 days I felt like I might not break apart. I didn't sleep. Diane slept like a baby beside me, and I lay there with my phone face down on my chest, and a little after 1 in the morning, I heard a door. I lifted the phone and pulled up the hall camera, and there he was, Carl in a t-shirt and boxers, padding down the hallway toward the kitchen. A minute later, the bed shifted. My wife sat up, soft as she could, and whispered, "Just getting some water," to a husband she thought was asleep. I watched on a 3-inch screen as my wife of 40 years walked into the kitchen and into another man's arms. I watched him bend her back over the counter and kiss her, the way I used to kiss her on a Friday night when the kids were finally down. I couldn't hear what they said. The camera mic wasn't good enough, but I didn't need to. You don't hold somebody like that the first time, or the 10th. That was an old, worn, comfortable thing between them. That was practice. I recorded every second of it. When she slid back into bed 20 minutes later, smelling faintly of him, she curled up against my back the way she had 10,000 nights, and I lay there and bit down on the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. Because if I'd opened my mouth, I don't know what would have come out. The next morning, I told everyone I was going to drive into town for real coffee. The rentals machine was junk, and I met my son at a diner on the square. He'd already watched the footage. His eyes were red-rimmed and his coffee sat cold in front of him. 2 years, he said. At least. Has to be. The way he stopped. How could she? How could he do that to Aunt Nora? To you? I turned my mug in a slow circle on the table and worked up the nerve to say the thing that had been eating me since 2 a.m. Scott, I need to ask you something and I need you to hear me out before you get mad. Okay, you were born 8 months after your mother and I got married. We always told people you came early. His face changed. Dad, don't. He's been around since before that. He started dating your aunt right around when your mother and I stop. He said it hard enough that the waitress glanced over. He lowered his voice. Look at me. I don't care what a calendar says. You taught me to fish. You showed up to every game, even when the shop was drowning. You walked me to the truck the morning I left for the army, and you didn't cry until you thought I couldn't see. You're my father. That's not a thing a test decides, so we are not doing that today. He swallowed. But we are going to get you everything. All of it. Down to the penny. So nobody can ever say you imagined this. He was right. The boy was right. We made a plan over a second pot of bad coffee. Scott knew a private investigator, a woman named Paula Reyes, who'd done some work for his union local. Quiet, thorough, didn't ask questions. She didn't need answered. We'd keep the cameras running through the weekend. We'd let nothing slip. And Aunt Nora? Scott asked. She's got a right to know. She does. But not yet. If we tell her now, she'll go straight at Carl, and the two of them will lawyer up and bury everything, and we'll never see the bank records. We get the proof first, then she decides what she wants to do with it. The rest of that weekend was the longest performance of my life. Nora finally drove up. All apologies about the traffic, hugging me, telling me 40 years was a miracle these days, and I hugged her back and hated myself for what I knew and she didn't. We took the pontoon out. Carl drove it, of course, one hand on the wheel and one arm around his wife's shoulders, the picture of a devoted husband, and I sat across from them with Diane's head on my shoulder and felt like a man watching a play about his own funeral. Sunday they packed up. Hugs all around. Same time next year, Nora said, and Diane squeezed her sister's hands and said, wouldn't miss it. The door shut behind them and Diane turned to me with that smile. Wasn't that a perfect weekend? Perfect, I said. The weeks after were the hardest part, and that surprised me. I'd thought the worst would be the lake house, but it was the everyday that ground me down. Eating the meatloaf she made on Wednesdays, watching the news beside her on the couch, hearing her tell our daughter-in-law on the phone how lucky she was, 40 years and still in love. I went to the shop, I came home. I ate, I lay beside her, and I felt like an actor who'd forgotten there was no audience, just me, performing a marriage that had already ended for an empty room. Paula Reyes was worth every dollar, and there were a lot of dollars. Inside of 10 days, she had phone records, hundreds of calls and thousands of texts between my wife and her brother-in-law, going back 26 months. 26 months, not a fling. Not a mistake at the lake. A second life. She had the hotel folios. Carl would tell Nora he had a regional conference in Memphis. Diane would tell me she was driving down to see her old college roommate in Tulsa. And they both turn up at the same Marriott in Bentonville, one room. Paid on a credit card I'd never seen with a billing address that turned out to be a P.O. box. There were photos, the two of them at a steakhouse, his hand over hers across the table. The two of them coming out of a hotel in Branson, laughing about something. The two of them at a farmer's market, 2 states away, holding hands like teenagers. But it was the bank that finished me. There's an account you need to see, Paula said, sliding a folder across the table at our third meeting. Scott sat next to me, jaw tight. Joint. Both their names. They opened it 18 months ago at a credit union neither of their families uses. They've been feeding it steady. And there's this. She tapped a second page. 3 months ago, your wife took a $110,000 home equity line against your house. Your name's on the deed, so it needed your signature. I never signed anything. No, Paula said. You didn't. Somebody did. And the money went straight into that joint account. I sat there and I couldn't feel my hands. 40 years. We'd paid that house off in 2019. We'd had a little party, and she'd quietly mortgaged it again, forged my name, and shoveled the money into a getaway fund with her sister's husband. They're leaving, I said. It wasn't a question. It sure looks like a war chest, Paula said gently. People building one of these are usually planning to disappear with it. When? Scott asked. Paula shrugged. No way to know for certain. But folks tend to wait for a milestone. Something that won't look suspicious until it's over. I knew the milestone the second she said it. The whole family knew it. In 6 weeks, my wife and I had a 40th anniversary party planned at the country club where I'd been a member for 20 years. Scott and Megan had been organizing it for months. 150 people, our friends, our church, my old employees, Carl and Nora standing up to give toasts. The perfect cover. Carl and Diane would smile through it, accept the gifts, raise their glasses, and a week or two later they'd both be gone. Off to start over in Florida or Arizona on money that included my own house. We tell Nora now, I said. That was the worst conversation of my life, and I've had some bad ones. I drove out to my sister-in-law's place on a Tuesday while Carl was at the office, and I sat in her kitchen and laid it out. At first, she laughed at me. Then she got angry, said I'd always been jealous of Carl's money, said I was bitter because my marriage had gone cold, said how dare I drive out here and try to poison her against her husband. I let her say all of it. Then I opened the folder. I watched my sister-in-law, a woman I'd known 35 years, who'd been at the hospital the night both my grandkids were born, break apart at her own kitchen table. She made a sound I'd never heard a person make. She held a photo of her husband holding my wife's hand in her 2 shaking hands, and she just made that sound over and over. They mortgaged your house, she finally whispered. He told me we couldn't take the cruise this year. He said money was tight, he said. She stopped. Her face did something then, cycled through the grief and came out the other side into something flat and terrible and calm. Your party, she said. The anniversary party. They're going to wait until after. That's my guess. She looked at me, and I'll never forget her eyes. 40 years of marriage between us in this family. And in that moment we were on the same side for the first time. 2 people, the same 2 people, had decided to throw away. I want to do it there, she said. At the party. In front of everyone they're going to lie to. I'd thought about it. God help me, I'd thought about it for 2 weeks. Stand up at my own anniversary dinner and detonate it. But I kept seeing Megan, who'd spent her own money on flowers. I kept seeing my grandkids in their little dress clothes. I kept seeing the friends who'd RSVP'd in good faith, who'd be standing there with cake in their hands while a marriage burned down in front of them. No, I said, not the party. Why the hell not? Let them stand up there pretending, because the party isn't theirs to ruin, Nora. It's ours. Yours and mine and Scott's and Megan's and 150 good people who don't deserve to carry that memory around the rest of their lives. They've already taken 40 years from me. I'm not letting them take that night too. I leaned forward, but I've got a better idea. They think they're safe right up until the moment they leave, so we let them get all the way to the edge. And then, the day before they think they're walking out the door, we do it quiet. And we do it legal, and we do it in a room with no innocent bystanders. Just them, just us, just the truth. She wiped her face. What do you mean? They opened that account at a credit union together. They forged my name on a HELOC. That's not just an affair, Nora. That's fraud. That's a felony in this state. We don't need a crowd. We need a lawyer, a forensic accountant, and the right Friday afternoon. For 6 weeks we became the best actors in Missouri. I told my wife I loved her every morning. I brought her flowers. I let her think the 40 years still meant something to me, because every day she believed I knew nothing was another day. My lawyer had to freeze that account, file the divorce, get the forgery in front of the bank's fraud department, and get the deed protected. Nora did the same with Carl. Laughed at his stories, made his coffee, told him at a family dinner how lucky she was. I watched her say it, and I watched him smile back, and I thought, you poor dumb man, you have no idea who's sitting across the table from you. The anniversary party came, and it was beautiful, and it nearly killed me. 150 people, my grandkids in their dress clothes. Carl stood up and gave a toast about commitment, about sticking it out, about how Diane and I were a model for all of them, and the room raised their glasses, and I raised mine, and across the table, my sister-in-law raised hers and looked at me, and we drank to a lie in front of everyone we loved, and we let it be perfect. We gave them their perfect cover. Because the trap was already shut, they just couldn't feel it yet. 10 days later, and Paula had been right, they'd booked one-way flights to Sarasota for the following Monday. We'd found the confirmation. We did it the way I wanted. My lawyer's conference room, downtown, a Friday at 4 o'clock. I'd asked Carl to come talk through some family business about the lake property. I'd asked Diane to come sign a thing for the accountant. They walked in separately, 10 minutes apart, and when they saw each other already sitting at that long table, and then saw Nora, and then saw Scott, and then saw the forensic accountant with 3 bankers' boxes of paper, I watched the color go out of both their faces at the exact same moment. "What is this?" Carl said. He was already reaching for the smooth voice, the easy hand. "Let's everybody just sit down," I said, and something in it put him back in his chair. We didn't shout. That was the part I'm proudest of. My lawyer walked them through it page by page in a calm, flat voice. The phone records, the hotels, the credit union account, balance $230,000, 80 of it from a home equity line drawn against a house. Carl knew full well I'd never agreed to encumber. The forged signature. The flights to Florida. "That account is frozen as of this morning," my lawyer said. "A fraud report has been filed with the credit union and a copy forwarded to the prosecutor's office. Given the forged instrument, the divorce petitions for both marriages were filed at 1 o'clock. You'll each be served." Actually, he checked his watch. "You've each just been served. The papers are in front of you." Carl finally found his lawyer's voice. "You can't, you have no right to, no right." Nora's laugh was a terrible thing. "You stood up at his anniversary and toasted his marriage while you were stealing the roof over his head to run away with his wife. You told me we couldn't afford a cruise, and you're going to sit there and lecture me about rights." She slid a photo across the table, the 2 of them outside the Branson Hotel, mid-laugh. "I gave you 33 years. I want you to look at this and understand that I know exactly who you are now. Everyone's going to know." Diane was crying. Mascara down her face, the way I'd seen her cry at sad movies, except this was for herself. "Gordon, honey, it wasn't, we never meant for it to happen. 2 years, Diane. I kept my voice even. It cost me everything I had. You didn't mean for it to happen for 2 years. You didn't mean to open an account. You didn't mean to forge my name. You didn't mean to book a one-way flight to Sarasota for Monday." I leaned forward. "At what point exactly did you not mean for any of it?" She had nothing. There's nothing to say to that, and she knew it. There was no crowd. No wedding ruined, no innocent face watching, no friend left holding a slice of cake while the world ended. Just the 6 of us in a quiet room, and the only people whose night was destroyed were the 2 who'd spent 2 years destroying everybody else's. They walked out separately, the way they'd come in, They didn't even bother denying it on the way out the door. What was the point? We had it all in 3 bankers' boxes. The divorce was ugly, the way those things are. Diane's lawyer tried to paint me as a controlling old man who'd driven her into another man's arms, and for about a week that stung. But you can't argue with a forged signature and a frozen account. Carr resigned from his firm before they could fire him. Turns out clients don't love handing their retirement to a man under investigation for fraud. The prosecutor settled for restitution and a felony plea rather than a trial, which suited me fine. I didn't need him in a cell. I just needed the truth, nailed to the wall, where nobody could pry it loose. I got the house back, clean and clear. Nora got most of what Carl had, and she earned every cent. 8 months in, Scott brought up the DNA test on his own. We were on my back porch, both of us with a beer, the cicadas going. "You ever want to do that test, Dad?" "I'll do it, whatever you want." I thought about it a while. The crickets, the dark coming on. "No," I said. "I had a lot of nights this year where the only thing that kept me standing was you, driving up to that lake with a shoebox of cameras, sitting in that diner telling me to look at you. A test's just chemistry. It can't tell me a single thing I don't already know about who my son is." He reached over and gripped my shoulder. This man who's bigger than me now, stronger than me now, and neither of us said anything else, because we didn't have to. A year out, the divorces were both final. Diane and Carl did end up together. Last I heard, they were in a 1-bedroom rental outside Sarasota. The 200 grand mostly eaten by lawyers, no friends down there, and not many left up here. I heard through somebody at church that they fight a lot, that the great love affair turned into 2 people who only ever liked the sneaking around and didn't much care for each other in the daylight. I'd be lying if I said a small mean part of me didn't smile at that. But mostly, I just don't think about them. They aren't mine to think about anymore. Nora and I stayed close. Not like that. People assumed, and we let them assume whatever they wanted. But it was never that. We were just 2 people the same betrayal had welded together, and we had dinner most Sundays, and we compared notes on our therapists and laughed about how absurd it all was. How you can live a whole life with someone and not know the first true thing about them. There is a comfort in being known by somebody who was in the same fire. I sold the hardware store the next spring, 41 years of it, my father's before mine, and bought a little place up near Table Rock, just a cabin and a dock and a John boat. I learned to cook more than burgers. I read in the mornings. The grandkids come up in the summer, and we fish off the dock, and I teach them the same knots my father taught me. Scott called one evening last fall, and I could hear the grin in his voice before he said a word. "Dad, Megan's pregnant. Number 3. "Well, hot dog," I said, and I had to sit down on the porch step. "And, he cleared his throat. "If it's a boy, we want to name him after you." I didn't trust myself to talk for a second. "You taught me what family is, Dad," he said. "It's not a name on a test. It's who shows up. You always showed up. I want my son to carry a name that means that." After we hung up, I sat out on the dock with a glass of bourbon and watched the sun go down over the water, the same kind of water where the whole thing started. I thought about the 40 years, the lie of them, the forged signature, the frozen account, the 150 people raising glasses to nothing. And then I thought about a shoebox of cameras, and a boy driving 4 hours in the dark, and a sister-in-law's hand steady on a stack of evidence, and a phone call about a baby they might name after an old man who'd thought he had nothing left. I lost a wife. I kept a son. I lost a marriage, and I found out at 63 exactly what I was made of and exactly who'd stand next to me when the floor dropped out. I raised the glass to the empty chair beside me and left it empty, because I'd finally learned the difference between alone and lonely, and I was the first and not the second. "To the truth," I said to the dark water, and to the people who showed up. The lake didn't answer. It just lay there gold and going gray, and for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The morning I stood in that doorway and watched 25 minutes wipe out 40 years, every nerve in my body screamed at me to charge in and start swinging. I'm glad I didn't. The man I'd have been if I'd done that. Red-faced, shouting, no proof, would have lost everything. Diane would have cried. Carl would have talked me in circles with that smooth voice of his, and by morning I'd have been the crazy, jealous husband, and they'd have been the victims. The floor dropped out from under me, but I made my head go cold instead of hot, and that one choice is the reason I still have a house, a name, and my self-respect. I've thought a lot about why it ended the way it did, and it wasn't luck. Kyle spent 2 years being clever, and clever ran out the second it met somebody patient. They thought I was too old and too trusting to notice, so they got sloppy. A joint account, a forged signature on my own home, one-way flights they never imagined I'd find. Their carelessness was the harvest of their own arrogance. My quiet was the opposite. I waited, I gathered. I let the truth pile up in 3 bankers' boxes until it didn't matter what they said, because the paper said it for me. People mistake patience for weakness. It's not. It's the sharpest weapon a wronged man owns, but the part I'm proudest of has nothing to do with how I caught them. It's that I had a chance to detonate my marriage at our anniversary party in front of 150 good people, and I said no. I wouldn't buy my justice with somebody else's pain. We did it in a quiet room with no innocent bystanders. The right way, the legal way. That line between getting even and becoming the kind of person who'd hurt the blameless to do it is the only line I refused to cross. And crossing it would have cost me the very thing I was fighting to keep, which was who I am. And it took everything I had to stand it. 6 weeks of bringing Diane flowers and saying I love you to a woman I was divorcing in secret. Nights lying beside her, biting the inside of my cheek. There's no shortcut through that. You just keep getting up. If I could put one thing in my grandchildren's pockets before they grow up, it's this. Be the person who keeps his head when the floor drops. Be the person too steady to be rushed and too decent to win dirty. And when life knocks you flat at 63 the way it knocked me, get up anyway. Because Scott driving 4 hours in the dark with a shoebox of cameras taught me the only truth that ever mattered. You find out who you are by who's standing next to you when everything burns down.